Nabney here. So, week 4. Um, we started off talking about when we're going to be meeting and that we're probably going to skip potentially Christmas, New Year's, maybe one or both. We'll have to decide about that, but we'll probably just add stuff on to the end of the year in a day to account for the fact that we are not doing some of those because there's a lot of stuff going on, so it might be easier to do some of that. Our goals were to talk about chapters 2 and 3 of Drawing Down the Moon, chapter 1 fully of To Ride a Silver Broomstick, and then some of the holidays that were coming up, sort of a mention of some of those. In fact, our homework was to look up some of the items from there. I think that's probably a good thing. So the earliest one that's coming up is the Krampus or Krampusnacht, and I thought it was interesting that the Grinch is a form of Krampus, so that was kind of fun. So yeah, we have chapter 2 of Drawing Down the Moon. We talked about that the solstice, there's a lot of energy around the solstice, especially on the 21st. It's when the veil between the underworld, kind of the world of the spirits and things like that, that becomes the thinnest, and that's why it is seemingly a holy night. It's the longest night of the year, and it's even stronger in terms of connecting with the dead than the like Dia de los Muertos. So that's really important. That's probably also why midnight mass was a thing, because the energy and stuff is so strong on that day. Like that's kind of where that midnight mass I'm sure came from. And then Christmas Eve is also in there. So really it sort of begins around Halloween, but the peak of that like winter solstice area, the peak is from the 21st to the 24th, around when Yule starts to Christmas Eve is the peak of that. So if you have an altar, it would be a good time for you to, connect with some of your dead relatives, things like that. But there's a lot of energy going around, so it's a really great time to be putting energy into some of those goals and tasks and things like that, right? So yeah, really good energy, some good work you can do there. We're going to journal around the pagan holidays. I talked about Krampus a little bit. We need to research the Battle of the Oak King and the Holly King. It's the winter versus the summer solstice. There's like one of them is young and one of them is old, and then they switch places. There's a lot of like rituals that happen, and they tend to be theatrical and dramatic in ways. Interesting thing when we were reading again chapter 2 of Drawing Down the Moon is, in general, paganism doesn't have like a lot of paganism doesn't have specific dogmas. Some of the offshoots would be a good way to say it. Some of the offshoots have some specific ways of doing things necessarily, but there isn't one exact way to do things, right? And I think that's an interesting thing about it, right? It's very what works for you, that kind of thing. It is highly suggested that you or that anybody in the group, it was suggested that we work with a deity. It could be anything. You can choose a pantheon, but try not to mix. So like for example, Romans and Celts don't really get along, so you wouldn't want Roman gods and Celtic gods necessarily. You'd sort of maybe pick one in that regard. Vikings and maybe Christians probably don't get along. So you can, but because you have two different things that are sort of warring with each other, it's harder to find that harmony and that balance, right? Because it's this war feeling that's going on, right? So maybe you have some ancestors in one way or the other, and that's how you decide what you do. Um, there's some pagans who do worship like the Virgin Mary and things like that. Like it's not a end all be all, right? A lot of people, again, they pick like Greek gods, Roman gods, Celtic gods, things like that. A lot of their choice tends to either be from their ancestry or just what they're drawn to, what they're pulled to. And some of our homework later on was to sort of look into and figure out some of that. I still need to do a lot of research on, different gods and goddesses. I know one of the first ones I'm probably going to research is Freya, because I've heard that one. I've heard that name floating around off and on. So I think that's probably where I'll start in terms of like looking up and researching and seeing if it feels right. And I think one of the strongest things that was said in this session that, again, I really latched onto, and I think that it was beautiful, is you are your own clergy. Right? You're the one that is deciding how a religion goes, who you're giving your energy to, who you're getting energy from. Like, you're your own clergyman. Like, just that idea, I'm like, yeah. So that was really cool. Then we went into Drawing Down the Moon, Chapter 3, which, pagan worldview is generally there. We talked about polytheism and pantheism, animism, monotheism, duotheists. This idea of invoking something where you're invoking it within you, right? When you invoke something, it's a within you kind of thing, right? Versus evoke, which is without, right? So you're evoking this thing that's outside of you. So I thought that was really interesting, right? In terms of what is this difference that's here. And I think I've mentioned it before because I remember talking through the things I liked about Drawing Down the Moon, but this idea that in paganism, you can recognize that your gods and my gods maybe are different gods, right? And I can, like, when you go into another person's house, right, you respect their house and, whatever gods they have in their house, right? And you don't need for them to have the same gods as yours, because also their perspective on the world is different. Their link to the world is different, right? Their connection is different. So they would have a different view on all of the things. So I really loved that idea. So again, things to look up. It's in Chapter 3 of Drawing Down the Moon. I still have it sitting right here next to me, right? Drawing Down the Moon, Chapter 3. But polytheism, pantheism, right? Animism. We talked about, if we all think that it's a thing, and I'm really big on energies. So that was interesting. Monotheism, which would be something like a Christianity where there's only one God, versus a pantheism where there's a pantheon of gods, right? There's many, many gods there, versus polytheism, just more than one, many, right? And then duotheism, very often with a duotheism, they tend to have this, like, there's a god and a goddess. There's, masculine and feminine. There's, the sun and the moon. There's this, like, duality that's there, right? You're one or the other, and you can attribute most things to one of those two categories. So it was really interesting to learn about and look into. And then the next thing we did was To Ride a Silver Broomstick, introduction, really introduction. It was, so not even section 1, but just this sort of introduction area. Which is very similar to things, ideas that were in Drawing Down the Moon, and that um, it is an accurate statement that the followers of witchcraft do not usually proselytize, which means you aren't going to find us standing at your local street corner thumping our books of shadows. Nor do you have to worry about jumping out of the shower to answer our serene and smiling faces at the door with your clothes stuck to various uncomfortable places on your wet body. But just because we, hopefully, aren't the forcible type doesn't mean that we don't exist. Trying to find us, though, can sometimes be rather tricky, and honestly, that's part of the fun. So, this idea that people find it, that it's not pushed upon them, I think is really good. So there's this little, intro page that she has. We talked about that. The idea that we used to have this, the joke that we made in the session was 1-900 get paid. And that there used to be this, either it was pre-recorded or it was like a per minute thing, and you would call in. So that's in that introduction, that page, because she mentions Silver Broomstick, Silver Ravenwolf mentions, I could entice you by saying, yes, after reading and practicing various exercises in this book, you will get the money you need, the love you desire, etc. But I would come close to sounding like the 900 numbers that I usually roll my eyes at. I'm sure you do too. And it's that joke was that 1-900 get paid, like pre-recorded, or they're paying per minute. And this is where those fortune telling laws are coming from. It's that snake oil feeling where you're you're saying something, but it's not really for any one person. I'm going to make money off of this very vague general thing. And that's a very icky kind of feeling. So I enjoyed that. That's the way the author felt. And I didn't say it before, but it is such a beautiful way to start the book. I mean, such a beautiful way to start the book. But this preface with the charge of the goddess, the descriptions that Silver Ravenwolf is giving to this ceremony that happened, kind of thing, right? It's just beautiful writing, I think. It was a really good way to intro it. And then that small introduction that's I'm not going to tell you here's how you make money. They're not going to sound like that. I'm trying to sell you something, kind of thing. So I really appreciated that. I think that our homework is going to be to do chapter 4 of Drawing Down the Moon. So that's what we're going to talk about next time. And then the next thing that we have is the homework that we're doing, that I'll be talking about, is the different things like solstice and things like that. So let me pull that window up. Okay, so we have the solstice in general. So in general, what is a solstice, right? And the idea is a solstice is when the day or the sun, right? We are either closer to it or further away. And when you have the winter solstice, right, you get the least amount of sunlight. So it is the shortest daytime, but it's the longest night, right? In a summer solstice, it's the other way around, where you have the longest day and the shortest night. So that's in general what a solstice is. So solstice was things to look up and to potentially journal about. Then we have specifically the winter solstice. We refer to it as Yule, but something that I wanted to mention, because I thought it was a really beautiful idea, is that sometimes people will stay up and do things during that whole night. And if we can't do that, to at least watch the sunrise during the solstice. This idea that, we're during the solstice, that winter has It hasn't even started yet, but it's almost over. I have a really beautiful idea. So, setting an alarm 1 hour before the sunrise to do something outside, a ritual outside, just watch the sunrise, something where you can visually see that sun is there and welcome that energy in, I think is really good for the solstice. I'm just going to go through Yule. It was number 3 on the list, but it's here, so we're going to talk about it. Yule specifically, it's, I think, where the 12 nights comes from. 12 nights, 12 days of Christmas. It starts on the 21st of December, and it goes until the 1st of January. It's not quite the Christian thing, but it's very similar in that regard. This isn't moving. The page that I thought it was. But there's way more information. Look it up. I think I have the wrong page that I pulled up. It's fine. But we'll say this. There's traditions that are in there. I think a lot of this comes from Germanic things. But there's a Yule log, Yule goat, Yule boar, Yule singing, so caroling comes from that. There's a lot of other traditions. If I take that off for a second and just, so there's a lot of really good things about Yule that are traditionish things, right? Like oftentimes a pine sort of tree, not pine tree, like that green, oh, I hate words. Pine is what's coming to my head, but the green is to represent the fact that there is still life, even though it's winter and we think things are dying, but it's still the celebration of things are still there. I think dried orange slices are used to sort of represent the sun, something bright and circular like that. There's a Yule log, and I think it was one of those things where it used to be where you would cut down a whole tree and the idea is you would try and shove it into like a fire slowly, and that the whole log, because it's so big, it would take 12 days to burn, kind of thing. Like that's the goal, but nowadays we don't always have that. So just lighting a candle, right, once a day could work. But as we were saying, it's a very energetic time. So a lot of good rituals are done here. It's a lot of either dismissing away or like trying to bring stuff out, because the connection to the energy, right, is really good. And also you want to make sure that you're separately doing something for your ancestors during this time frame. Okay, what else did we have? Let me look. Saturnalia was another one. Plain Toast, he called this the fun one. And it says, originally celebrated on the 17th, Saturnalia was extended first to 3 and eventually to 7 days. Right? So the date has been connected to the winter sowing season. And it can vary from time to time. It's a lively festival, I think, when I was reading about it. Businesses were extended. So there's a lot of things where they overlap, right? So Saturnalia, celebrate Christmas kind of in that same time frame, right? Generally, they were decorated with greenery and lights, so it's about this decoration. Presents were given to the children and the poor, right? It was, being merry, dancing, singing. It was a lot of that. I think I have it saved here. A really interesting thing when I was reading about it that I thought was fun is that there's a role reversal kind of behavior. Slaves were treated as a banquet, and I think they usually even elect a king. Um, and it was a license for slaves to disrespect their masters without threat of punishment, right? It was called December Liberty. It was a time for free speech back when, they had slavery and slaves. Free speech was the time period for that free speech. There was no social norms, right? Were threatened because the holiday would end. So the idea was it was temporary and had limits. So I think people were fine with it, right? So it's fun. A lot of, I think, of the celebrations that we get from Christmas are based on some of the similar things that people were doing anyway. But it's a Roman and Greek sort of holiday. It comes from that time period. So it's kind of fun. The last thing was Krampus or Krampusnacht. We'll kind of celebrate it. But in general, children leave boots outside of their bedroom door, and they're either going to find a reward for being good or a rod, which means they've been bad. I think this is where the stockings come from in Christmas, right? A lot of that idea of stockings. I think people put wooden shoes out of the house sometimes in Germany. But it also comes from this idea of Krampus, who would, potentially, he goes around carrying birch sticks to swat naughty children, right? And even potentially, I think, take them away. But, the nice children have a reward in their boots, and the naughty ones would get, a not so nice thing, because they're going to get lashed, I think is the word they were using. So it's very interesting, This is where, again, lump of coal in their stockings. So this is where this is coming from, right? I really love that that's coming from there, that I get this information on sort of the history behind where things in Christmas are coming from, right? You have this joy and celebration and caroling and singing. It very lines up with that Saturnalia thing that people were doing anyway, right? You have this giving presents, Saturnalia, right? You have this stocking, lump of coal and things like that comes from like a Krampus stuff. So interesting to see how modern Christianity saw what was already being there and sort of built upon it and said, well, let's call this these different things. Let's say this or use it like this. So it's fascinating to see how the histories come about. So I think that was, some of the most fun that's there. A note to the side when we were talking about the fact that the craft tends to not have a lot of dogma. That we were in chapter 2, we were talking about how there's not a lot of dogma, aka you don't have to do things certain ways necessarily. The phrase that Plainto said is that the deeper you go, the more rules there are. So I thought that was interesting, and definitely makes me look forward to kind of the next stuff, right? So let me know in the comments if you celebrate anything during the winter season. If it's solstices, what do you do? What are some of your rituals or traditions? Do you celebrate Saturnalia or not? Do you celebrate Yule? What are some of your favorite Yule things? I know some people will put messages in and they'll burn them in a fire. And when I was talking to Plain Toast about that, it's like you tend to want to burn things that you're trying to get rid of or release. So how different people do different things for Yule, I think that's very interesting. So please tell me if there's something that you do. Do you celebrate Krampusnacht? Krampus? Do you believe in them? Do you do anything like that? Did your parents do that? Did you grow up with anything like that? I'm completely interested in all of that. Like, the history side, the knowledge side is super fun. So please let me know about that. And then hopefully I'll see you again when I go to make the video for week 5. Either way, I hope you're enjoying the journey as much as I am, even 4 weeks in. Um, yeah. See you soon. Bye.